Hey AP, welcome to your last video on for loops. This one's going to be quick because you've done a few before. This is all about nested for loops, so just showing you that you can put a for loop inside of a for loop and demonstrating what that will do. So for right now, please feel free to open up a blank editor. There is no starter code for this, it is just the blank editor. And just sit back and relax as we run through this. So the very first thing that I think, no, I was going to show us life off the canvas with nested for loops, but we can get into that later. That does not need to happen right now. Let's just dive into these on the canvas. It's visual, it makes sense, it works for us. We can figure out off the canvas if we want. I strongly encourage you to play with just printing things to the console in a for loop off the canvas, just to see how that works and what it gives you. But for right now, let's just make a drawing. So in our draw function, in the brand new editor that you have started, and hopefully you have renamed this something smarter than the random name it gave you, maybe nested for loops example, so you know, and you've saved it. Let's go ahead and make our first for loop. I'm gonna, again, set it up. So I have my parentheses, I have my curly braces, I have my space in the middle. And very similar to the last video, I'm just going to make a row of circles. So I think I would like 20 circles in my row. So I'm going to say let x equal 20. Remember that the words let and var are interchangeable. I realize in some videos I may have swapped back and forth, and that's fine. I'm going to say that, I don't want it to equal 20, I want it to equal 1 starting out. My bad. While x is less than or equal to 20, that will get me my 20 circles. Let's increase x by 1 every time. And then in here, I'm going to draw a circle, and I'm going to say that circle should be at x times 20. I'll have them all touch 100, and let's make them size 25. So I hit play, I get my long row of circles. Oh, this isn't quite what we want. Let's make it 20. It's still off the screen a little bit. Let's multiply by 10. Oh, that's better. Okay, I multiplied by 10. Now let's space them out by 25. Oh no, that's changing their size. Let's space them out by 15? That's a little better. How about by 17? How about by 20 now? Still off the canvas. Let's make it 18. They'll overlap a little bit. It'll be okay. Alright, so I have my circle. I have x equals 1. It's drawing exactly 20 circles for me. Again, you're welcome to change this around. You could say that while x is less than or equal to the width, draw circles, and instead of adding 1 every time, you could add 50 or 20, and it would make the number of circles for you. But in this instance, I want exactly 20 circles. I want what I want. So I've drawn 20 circles this way. What if I wanted to draw a grid of 20 circles? That's really where my nested for loops on the canvas come into play, because what a nested for loop is going to do, it's going to be a for loop inside a for loop, and it's going to say that for every one of these circles that have been drawn, let's also do something else. So when the loop draws this one, it's then going to do something for every time this is drawn, and then every time this is drawn. And in our case of this nested for loop, we're going to use it to draw down as well as drawing across. So I am going to just comment out this ellipse for a moment, and I'm going to start adding in a for loop inside of my for loop. So on line 9, I'm going to start a for loop again. And now, because I want to draw down, I'm going to use another variable. I'm going to call this one y. I'm going to start y at, do I want it to be at 1? I think I want y to be wherever this one starts, which is 100. Let's start it at 100, so it starts far enough down. I'm going to start y at 100, and I'm going to say that while y is less than or equal to 10, I will just do 10 rows of circles. Let's add 1 to y. And then just like every for loop, this needs to have a curly brace to begin and a curly brace to end. And I'm going to choose to end that for loop right after this ellipse. So when I comment this back in, it lives inside my for loop. I'm actually going to tab it under just so it's very clear that it lives inside that for loop. And I'm just going to check my curly braces, because as we start doing this, we're going to see we have a lot of curly braces. So my draw curly braces are matched, my outermost for loop curly braces are matched, and my innermost for loop curly braces are matched. This is also where I want to remind you that white space doesn't matter, so if you would like to add extra like white lines, just hit enter a few times, more than welcome. Go nuts. But this is a very solid start. And so within this very solid start, if I hit play now, get nothing. And that's because I have nothing happening inside this for loop. I'm not using my Y at all. So let's try and use my Y to change this. So I'm going to make this times 18 as well. So now, why is it still not there? I did a very silly thing and it's never going to show up because I said that Y starts at 100, but this is going to run as long as Y is less than or equal than 10 because I wanted 10 shapes drawn. I still want 10 shapes drawn, but this will never execute. So let's change this to 110 because that will make sure that it does it 10 times over the initial value of 100. So let me go ahead and hit play now. And let me go find my problem again. Alright guys, I found my second problem, which is awesome because we can explore this together. So when I have Y times 18 here, it's not working for me. And it is printing second loop, so it's running this for loop. And this is just a note that if you're not sure if things are working, adding a console log like I did while I was on pause is a great way to troubleshoot. If I know that my loop is running, then I know the only issue has to be with how this circle is being drawn. So I'm going to try and change this 18 value all the way down to 2. And I see when it changes to 2, I get my circles drawn. They're very close together, but I get them drawn. I see that if I change it to 3, they draw much further down the page and they're starting to space farther apart. And the reason why that's happening is my Y value started so high. Because my Y value started so high, I'm like multiplying 100 by 3, I'm getting like 300, and then I'm doing like 301, 303, 306, like it keeps increasing by a lot. So I can't use really high numbers, and this is actually a great place for me to explore some other methods of drawing this. So instead of doing the Y++, let's try doing that thing that I keep alluding to, where instead of multiplying here, we set everything up in my for loop. So I'm definitely going to have 20 circles going across in my first loop. Now in my second loop, let's say that Y is going to start at 100, but I want this to run until Y gets to 300. And then inside of there, I'm going to say Y plus equal 25. So it's adding 25 every time. And because it's adding 25 every time and not 1, I'm not going to multiply anything here. So I'm just going to hit play. And now I have 20 circles going across, and I have as many circles going down as is needed to get to 300 when I'm adding 25 each time instead of adding 1 every time. So the disadvantage of this is it means I'm not guaranteed to have the number that I intended. I have to do like a little head division to get the numbers I want, but it is making this grid, and now we can go back to our beginning idea that each row, or this first row at least, is being generated by this outermost for loop. This is the one that's determining that I have 20 circles being drawn. And this innermost for loop is saying, well, for every 20 circles you draw across, for every one of those 20, let's draw down a row. So after this first circle is drawn in my loop, it says, okay, let's draw another circle where the Y is 100. We're going to keep drawing circles and adding 25 to the Y position of those circles until we get to 300, and then we're going to stop. Then we're going to go back to this first part of the loop, draw a second circle, and then draw down using the second loop. I still think this is a useful and valid thing for you guys to see, even though we had to change our numbering a little bit. This should also be a message to not be afraid of just messing with values. You're not going to break anything. You might create an infinite loop, but save often, so if that happens, you can refresh and get rid of it. Nothing is permanent that you do in your code. This is also a great time to see and demonstrate that all of these numbers, these X's and these Y's that you guys are using, those are just number values. So you can use them to stand in for anything. You could use them for a stroke weight. You could use them for a stroke color. You could also use them for a fill color, which I think can be really, really beautiful. So here I could say that x times 10 is going to be my red value, y is my green value, and let's make 75 my blue. And now when I hit play, I get this like cool ombre of greens going into oranges, and I could mess with those numbers a little bit. I could multiply x by 5. I could increase or decrease the y value by dividing or by multiplying to try and get different values in here. I could change this last value. And then I can draw many things a little differently just by using those two values within my nested for loops. You do not need nested for loops to plug the x and the y into some other weird values. It is just an option and a thing that you guys have to use. So for this project, you guys are going to be trying to make an interesting design. You can do it on a canvas that is just 400 by 400. You can also resize this in any way that you see fit. But you are trying to use nested for loops. You are trying to use conditionals somewhere. And in those conditionals, you are trying to use modulos to make decisions. Bonus points if you also use random to make something happen. Do the very best you can with this. I am not judging on artistic merit, but I think that if you guys are very open to exploring, you're going to end up with some really cool generative results, and I'm super excited to show them off. Good luck, guys, and come to Lab Lounge hours if you have questions. Bye!